There was a line I wasn't allowed to cross. And standing just this side of it, I could see, clearly, the way you see your own hands in front of your face on a bright morning. I could see what had already entered, not what was coming, what had already come, into 3 states. And I came back to this body specifically so I could tell you that. My name is Marcus Pruitt. I spent 22 years in the United States Army. My specialty was intelligence analysis, reading patterns, verifying sources, determining what was real and what was manufactured. I was trained at considerable expense to the American taxpayer to not be fooled, to distinguish signal from noise, to look at a set of data points and see what they were actually saying rather than what someone wanted me to believe they were saying. I am telling you that so you understand what kind of man is sitting here talking to you. I am not a man who invents things. I am not a man who mistakes fear for fact. I am not a man who goes looking for a story to tell and shapes the evidence to fit it. I spent 2 decades building a career on the exact opposite of that. And what I am about to tell you is the most verifiable, most specific, most thoroughly examined experience of my life. And I have not been able to explain it by any means available to me. And I have tried every means available to me. On the morning of September 14th, 2023, I was in my backyard splitting firewood. That is how ordinary it was. I was splitting firewood. It was a Thursday, the kind of Thursday that looks exactly like every other Thursday from the outside. I had been up since 5. I'd had my coffee on the back porch the way I do every morning, regardless of weather. It had rained the night before, and the air had that particular smell that October mornings have in Tennessee. Wood smoke from somewhere down the road, wet leaves, the cold that comes in off the hills just before sunrise. I had a pile of oak to get through before the week was out. Donna was inside. The kids were grown and gone. It was just me and the axe and the wood, and a morning that had every right to be completely unremarkable. I had been at it for maybe 40 minutes when I felt something in my chest that I want to describe to you with precision, because precision is what I have, and precision is what this deserves. It was not pain, not initially. It was pressure. The specific kind of pressure that arrives in the center of the chest and radiates, and your body registers it before your mind has language for what it is. I had been in enough situations in my career to know what the body feels like when something is seriously wrong with it. I set the axe down. I stood very still for a moment, and then the world tilted. I did not feel myself fall. I was upright, and then I was not. And between those 2 states, there was nothing, no transition, no impact, just a discontinuity. What I learned later is that I was on the ground for some amount of time before Donna looked out the kitchen window and saw me. She has never told me exactly how long. I don't think she knows exactly how long. She called 911 and began CPR, and the paramedics arrived 11 minutes after that call. What the medical record shows is a flat line on arrival at the cardiac unit of Vanderbilt University Medical Center in Nashville. What it shows after that is 44 minutes of resuscitation before they reestablished a cardiac rhythm, 3 days on life support. A neurologist who sat down with my wife and, as gently as he could, walked her through the probability that the man who woke up, if he woke up, might not have full access to the man she had married. I want to sit with that number for a moment. 44 minutes. Because if you know anything about cardiac resuscitation, you know that the standard window is somewhere between 4 and 6 minutes before the brain begins to sustain serious damage from oxygen deprivation. 44 minutes is not a clinical anomaly. It is a clinical impossibility. It is the kind of number that appears on a chart and makes physicians look at each other across a room without saying what they are both thinking. And I woke up on the 4th day with all of my faculties, with no neurological impairment, and with the first words out of my mouth being 7 words that nobody in that room had any context for. It's already in 3 states. That is what I said. Before I knew where I was, before I had oriented myself to the room, to the light, to Donna's face, those were the words my mind went to first. Not her name, not a question about what had happened. 7 words that had been waiting inside me through 3 days of unconsciousness, ready to surface the moment I had a surface to come through. I did not know yet what they meant in the full sense. I knew what I had been shown. I knew what the words referred to. What I did not yet have was the context of being back in a body, in a hospital room, in a world where those words would require explanation. What I saw while I was gone is the reason I am sitting here telling you this. And I need you to hear it because I was told, explicitly, directly, in a way I will explain, that it was meant for the people who would find it. I believe you are one of those people. I don't say that lightly. I say it because I was told to say it, and because I was told to say it only to people who were already paying attention. And the fact that you are here watching this tells me something about you. The first thing I need to tell you about is what I was shown about death itself. Not about heaven, not about light, not about the tunnel, which I did get, and which was nothing like what I had read or heard or imagined it would be. What I was shown first, before the three states, before the specific revelation I came back carrying, was what death actually is. And I need you to understand this because without it, the rest of what I'm going to tell you doesn't have its proper foundation. I want to tell you how the knowing arrived, because it didn't arrive the way information arrives here. Here, you learn things sequentially. Someone tells you something and you process it and you integrate it and it becomes part of what you know. Over there, the knowing comes differently. It arrives the way sunrise arrives, not by the addition of light, but by the removal of darkness. One moment you are in the absence of understanding, the next moment you are simply in understanding, and the understanding has no edges, and you cannot find the moment it began. What I understood was this: death is a threshold. Every human being who has ever lived crosses it, without exception. And what determines the nature of that crossing, what determines what a person encounters, what they carry, what they are capable of on the other side of it, is not what most of us have been taught. It is not a ledger of good deeds weighed against bad ones. It is not a doctrinal compliance test. What determines the nature of the crossing is the integrity of the consciousness that arrives at the threshold. Let me say that again because it is the most important thing I came back carrying, and I need you to actually hear it before I tell you the rest. The integrity of the consciousness that arrives at the threshold. I was shown this not as a theological principle. I was shown it as a structural fact. The way a map shows you a road, not as an opinion about the road, but as a representation of what is actually there. The threshold exists. The crossing happens. And what you bring to that crossing matters in a way that is specific and measurable and real. I was shown this first because it is the precise reason that what I was shown next is catastrophic. And I want you to hold that word, catastrophic, because I do not use it easily and I did not choose it for effect. I came back from 44 minutes of clinical death using that word for a specific reason, because what is happening in those three states is catastrophic, not to the body, not to the life, catastrophic to the consciousness that will one day arrive at that threshold. What I was shown about the mark did not look the way I would have expected it to look. I want to be very clear about this, because I think a lot of people who have read Revelation or who have thought carefully about this subject have a specific image in their mind: a chip, a barcode, a tattoo, something visible and physical that can be pointed to and identified. I am not saying those things are irrelevant. I am saying that what I was shown was not the form. What I was shown was the function. And the function is something that a man with 22 years of intelligence analysis experience recognized immediately. I was shown what it does to a person's awareness at the threshold. I was not in a body, but I was watching, and I want to use that word carefully because watching implies a visual experience, and what I had was more comprehensive than that. It was a full spectrum awareness, but watching is the closest word I have. I was watching what happened when people who were carrying the mark arrived at the threshold, and I want to describe this to you as precisely as I am able. Imagine a door, not as a metaphor, as a fact. A passage from one state of existence to another, through which every consciousness travels. Now imagine arriving at that door with something attached to you that you accepted willingly, that you accepted because it was presented as protective, as beneficial, as the reasonable and responsible thing to do in the circumstances in which it was offered to you. Something that, in your daily life, functions exactly as you were told it would function. It causes you no pain. It requires nothing of you consciously. It sits quietly inside the structure of your existence, interfacing with the systems of the world you live in, doing what it was designed to do. And what it was also designed to do, what you were never told it was designed to do, is modify the frequency at which your consciousness operates at the moment of crossing. I know that language sounds strange. I know it does not map cleanly onto anything most of us learned in Sunday school or medical school. But it is the most precise language I have for what I was shown, and I spent a year and a half looking for better language and could not find any. The consciousness arrives at the threshold carrying something that was not part of its original architecture, something that was installed, and I use that word deliberately because that is the word that came with the understanding, installed from the outside, accepted from the outside, with effects that only become fully visible at the threshold itself. What I saw was not violent. I want to be clear about that too, because I think violence is what people expect from an account of this kind. What I saw was gentle. It was a gentleness that I found, and I have thought about how to say this correctly for a long time. I found the gentleness more terrifying than violence would have been. Because a violent thing you can resist. A gentle thing, a comfortable thing, a thing that is good to you in every observable way until the one moment when it matters most. That is a different kind of threat. That is the kind of threat that an intelligence analyst loses sleep over. Not the enemy that announces itself. The enemy that is already inside the wire. Now I need to tell you about the three states. And I need to tell you something first about how I was shown this, because it will explain why I cannot give you three names on a piece of paper and tell you to avoid those places. I was shown it the way I used to be shown intelligence data in the field, not as a headline, as a pattern. 3 clusters, 3 regions, 3 places where something had achieved what, in my professional language, we would call operational status, meaning it was not in development, not in a pilot program, not in a planning document, operational, running, in the lives of people who were going about their days with no awareness of its secondary function. And I was shown the characteristics of these 3 regions in a way that would allow me to recognize them upon return. Not by their names, I was not shown their names, but by 4 specific characteristics that I was shown in enough detail that I have spent the past 2 years watching state legislation and public health infrastructure and digital identification programs looking for the pattern. The first characteristic is a state-administered digital identification system tied to health status. Not a federal system, state-administered, presented to the public as a convenience, an upgrade, a modernization of existing ID infrastructure. The second characteristic is a voluntary opt-in that contains, in the administrative code beneath the public-facing materials, the legal architecture for mandatory application under conditions that are described in language that most people would read past without recognizing what they were reading. The third characteristic is federal coordination that is not disclosed in the materials available to the public. The federal involvement is real. It is documented in interagency correspondence that is technically public, but practically inaccessible to the average person. The fourth characteristic is an opt-out mechanism. This is the one I want you to think about most carefully. There is a way to decline. There is, on paper, a choice, but the opt-out, when exercised, results in the restriction of services. Not services at the margins, services that a person living in this country in 2025, 2026 cannot functionally do without. The choice exists. The consequences of the choice are structured in such a way that the choice is not, in any practical sense, free. I look for those 4 characteristics. I found them, or I'm watching them develop, in 3 states. I will not name those states here. This is not evasion. I was explicitly instructed, and I mean explicitly, in a way I will describe in a moment, not to give you a geography to follow, because geography moves, because the pattern is what matters. Because if I tell you the 3 states, and you move your attention to those 3 specific names, you will miss the 4th state, and the 5th, and the 6th, because the pattern does not stop at 3. I need you to be watching for the pattern in your own state. That is what I came back to tell you. Before I came back, there was a boundary. I described it briefly at the beginning, and I want to go deeper into it now because it carries information that I think is important. I had been shown the 3 states. I had been shown what the mark does to consciousness at the threshold. I had been shown the 4 characteristics to look for, and then I reached the edge of what I was permitted to know. It was not a wall. It was more like a shore. The place where what could be given to me and carried back ended, and what lay beyond that shore was real, was extensive, and was not mine to receive. And I want to tell you what that felt like from the inside, because it matters. It was not frustrating. I want you to understand that. In the state I was in, frustration is not available. What I felt was something closer to reverence. I was at the edge of what a human being in my specific situation could be trusted to carry back and have it be useful. Not because I was insufficient, because the carrying is calibrated, because the revelation was not meant to be everything. It was meant to be enough. Enough for the people it was meant to reach, enough to be actionable, enough to matter without being so overwhelming that it produced paralysis instead of attention. And then I was given the instruction, go back, say what you saw, do not specify more than you were shown, do not refuse to say what you were shown. The people who need to hear it will find it. Your job is not to convince, your job is to testify. 3 instructions. I have lived by them since September of 2023. I have not overstated, I have not been silent, and I will tell you something about the moment that broke my silence entirely and brought me here. In February of 2025, I read a news report. It was about a state-level digital health credential program. The details of that program, the administrative structure, the opt-out language, the interagency coordination it referenced in a footnote that most readers would have skipped, matched, in precise and specific detail, something I had been shown on the other side. Not approximately, not broadly, precisely. I described it to Donna before I showed her the article. I told her what the opt-out language would say. I told her what the footnote would reference. She pulled it up on her phone. She read it. She looked at me. She did not say anything for a long time. That was the morning I understood that the window I had been given was not indefinite. I want to stop for a moment. I need you to actually hear what I'm about to say. I spent 17 months after I came back telling myself I had time, telling myself the right moment would be clear when it arrived. telling myself that one more verification, one more piece of confirmation would make the testimony more credible when I finally gave it. And in February of 2025, sitting at my kitchen table with a news article that said precisely what I had been shown said it would say, I understood that I had been waiting for permission that was never going to arrive in the form I was expecting. The only permission I had ever been given was the instruction itself. Go back, say what you saw. This is what I have been carrying. I need you to understand what that means practically. I am a man who used to have nightmares 4 nights a week. Combat nightmares, operational nightmares, the accumulated weight of 2 decades of seeing what human beings do to each other in the worst circumstances. I have not had a nightmare since the morning I woke up in that hospital. Not one. That is not what I expected recovery from a 44-minute cardiac death to look like. What I expected was PTSD, or at minimum, a significant recalibration period. What I got was quiet. What I got was a kind of certainty that I had never had before and have never lost since. But I want to be honest with you about the other side of that. There is a thinness to ordinary life that I did not expect and that took a long time to navigate. I am not looking for a way back. I want to be clear about that. I am not a man in despair. I tend my garden. I drink my coffee. I love my wife and my children and my grandchildren with everything I have. But I have tasted something that the daily world cannot match, and the comparison is permanent. Every person who has been where I have been knows what I am talking about. There is a quality of reality on the other side of that threshold that makes this world feel like a photograph of a painting, not without value, not without beauty, but at one remove from the thing itself. What I am asking you to do with that is not to be discouraged by it. What I am asking you to do with it is understand why I came back. If it had been purely my choice, in the moment when the choice seemed most available, I am not certain I would have chosen to return. I returned because I was given something to carry, and the carrying of it put me back in my body before I had fully decided anything. And I am grateful for that. Because I believe that what I carried back matters. I believe it was calibrated for this moment. And I believe that you, sitting here watching this, are part of why I was sent. You now know something. I want to be careful and slow about naming what you now know, because I think it deserves that. I think it deserves to be said plainly and completely rather than quickly and moved past. You now know that a man died for 44 minutes in a backyard in Tennessee on a Thursday morning in September of 2023. You now know that before he came back, something was shown to him. You now know that what was shown to him was not symbolic and was not metaphorical. You now know that it concerns a reality that is already present in 3 states and spreading, not as a future prophecy, but as a current condition. You now know that the mark is not waiting for a specific moment in history to be introduced. You now know that what it does quietly and gently, and in ways that will not be visible to the person carrying it in their daily life. You now know that there is a threshold that every human being crosses, and that what you arrive at that threshold carrying matters in a way that is specific and real, and not reversible after the fact. You now know that there was a boundary, and that what lay beyond it was real, and that what was given to this side of it was given with precision and purpose. You now know that the instruction given to me was to testify, not to convince, not to frighten, to testify. This is the testimony. Now I want to ask you to do one thing, not many things, one thing, this week, before you set this down and move on to the next item in your day. Look at your own state's current digital identification infrastructure. Not as a general project, specifically. Find out whether your state has a health-linked digital credential program, whether it is currently voluntary, and what the opt-out language says. Not the summary language, the administrative code. Look at what the opt-out restricts. Look at whether there is federal coordination referenced in the program's documentation. Most of this information is public. Most of it is in documents that are accessible but not easy to find. That difficulty is not an accident. I am not asking you to do this because I want you to be afraid. Fear is not what I came back with. What I came back with is attention. The specific kind of attention that comes from having been shown something clearly and then sent back to a world where most people are not looking at it. I am asking you to look at it. That is all. Just look at it. Because the pattern I was shown is specific, and it is recognizable. And if you look carefully at what is already in place in your state, you will know whether you are already inside one of those 3 regions, or whether you have time that others do not. I need you to hear this directly, and I am going to say it as simply as I can. You did not find this video by accident. In the 17 months between waking up in that hospital and sitting here talking to you, I have come to believe that the people who needed to hear this would be brought to it. Not everyone, not randomly. The people who were already paying attention. The people who had already felt, in some way they couldn't fully articulate, that something was wrong. That something had already arrived that most of the people around them weren't seeing. If that description fits you, and if you are still here, I believe it fits you, then this was meant for you. Not as comfort, as confirmation, as the testimony of a man who was shown something and was told to bring it back, and who is fulfilling that instruction right now, in this moment, to you. If this reached you, if any part of what I shared today settled into a place inside you where you already knew something was happening, I want to ask you to subscribe to this channel. Not because I need the numbers, because there are other accounts out there, other people who came back carrying pieces of what I was shown, and I believe you are someone who needs to hear those pieces alongside this one. What I was shown was calibrated to what I could carry. Others were shown different pieces. The full picture requires more than one witness. This channel is one place those witnesses are gathered. And in the comments, I want to ask you a specific thing. I want to ask you, where in your life have you already seen the pattern I described? Not theoretically, specifically. In your state, in your county, in the legislation that has passed or is pending. Write it. Put it on record. Because sometimes saying a thing out loud, in a space where other people can see it, is the first step toward doing something about it. I came back for a reason. I believe this testimony is part of that reason. I do not know everything that was meant to come from it. I know that I was told to testify, and I have testified, and whatever that sets in motion is no longer only in my hands. Whatever is coming, and something is coming, I was shown enough to know that with complete certainty. I hope this reaches you in time to matter.